So, what has ASEAN done so far for WPS, and what more can be done? ASEAN as an intergovernmental organization has largely followed the UN decisions and commitments. All the ASEAN members are members of the United Nations. So ASEAN's WPS agenda is largely guided by those commitments made at the UN level to implement Resolution 1325 and other United Nations Security Council resolutions on women, peace and security. But before 1325, as I mentioned earlier, women's issues and concerns on the ASEAN agenda also had as their key reference instrument United Nations level commitments such as the 1995 Beijing Platform for Action and of course the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discriminations Against Women. So ASEAN statements, plans of action that look at promoting WPS and protection of women's rights are based also on these individual ASEAN member states' commitments made as UN member states. I mentioned earlier about the WPS agenda being rather nascent in ASEAN. The ASEAN Regional Cooperation Framework provides the setting for member states to translate international commitments into regional and national undertakings. And so this is how it's going to be, I think, for ASEAN to pursue the WPS agenda in helping translate those international commitments made for 1325 into actionable policy recommendations and activities at the regional level, and also helping national implementation capacities. The ASEAN Women for Peace Registry is the first of its kind for ASEAN, and it was meant to be a creative way to bring together knowledge and also resource mobilization for both capacity building and for advocacy on gender in peace and conflict in Southeast Asia. And while it is separate, it is also supposed to be complementary to existing mechanisms. The AWPR was formed at a time when ASEAN was seeking to align the efforts of the ASEAN Committee on Women, the ASEAN Commission on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Women and Children, and the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation to mainstream women's rights and gender equality in peace and security matters and across sectors. So the AWPR came into existence when these entities that I've listed were working on an ASEAN regional study on women, peace and security to, and I quote, establish an ASEAN-wide common understanding on women, peace and security while encouraging nuanced interpretations at the national and local levels. So any researcher, including myself, seeking a one-stop overview of how ASEAN member states approach the WPS agenda collectively or at national levels should refer to this study as the first step. And I mentioned earlier about in ASEAN, the WPS priorities not always being about conflict. I think it's important to recognize also that the ASEAN approach is by nature oriented towards identifying actionable policy options to realize the objectives that it has set for itself. It is an intergovernmental organization, and policy relevant recommendations are always important to help move that intergovernmental process and agenda forward. So I think as researchers, it's important that when we conduct more research, deeper research, further research on this topic, we bear this aspect in mind and understand how ASEAN approaches the topic of peace and security when we assess lessons and gaps in WPS with a view to producing those types of policy relevant recommendations. I also mentioned earlier about not all ASEAN member states experiencing conflict and strife at the level and scale that some member states have faced or still continue to face. But all ASEAN member states have confronted threats to the region's collective human security. So this cross-sectoral approach that the ASEAN policymakers want to take for women, peace, and security issues need to also consider and address the many aspects of security, such as the effects of violent extremism, disaster management, and climate change, and most recently, COVID-19. And in addition to women in peace processes and post-conflict rehabilitation, women's empowerment, women's economic empowerment especially, I think should also be there as a form of conflict prevention, resolution, and recovery. So there are many topics for further research. There's a recent report that came out on women, peace, and security in Asia Pacific 20 years on. It has a section that identifies both progress and lessons and also remaining persistent challenges. ASEAN is currently putting final touches to its regional action plan on women, peace, and security. It is going to be launched very soon this year. And I think now the next step would, of course, be after the launch of this regional action plan on women, peace, and security, discussing implementation would be the next step. And this entails identifying who will shepherd the action plan priorities from conceptualization, resource mobilization, through to implementation and follow-up. And there are, of course, many other areas for further study and action. We need to continue the work on increasing women's participation in peace processes, on preventing gender-based violence. Statistics and research have found that in Indonesia, domestic violence is the second highest cause of violent death. There is also the importance for advocacy, raising awareness, keeping WPS discussions alive on regional and national agendas. And the ongoing multidimensional crisis in Myanmar today presents both opportunities and challenges for ASEAN's pursuit of women in peace and security. So I think further research can certainly assist us all in identifying responses for recovering and healing, building on the strengths of past experiences in ASEAN. For example, the women peace negotiators' contributions in Mindanao and Aceh, the women peace networks in southern Thailand, and also the women peace networks' contributions to the previous nationwide ceasefire discussions in Myanmar's complex peace process. And there's a lot of work that has been done. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think research towards policy relevant recommendations will really help move forward ASEAN's agenda for women, peace, and security. Thank you.